Christianity was apparently introduced into the Slavic state of Keivanrus by Greek missionaries from Byzantium in the ninth century. An organized Christian community is known to have existed at Kiev as early as the first half of the tenth century, and in 957 Saint Olga, the region of Kiev, was baptized in Constantinople. This act was followed by the acceptance of Christianity as the state religion after the baptism of Olga's grandson Vladimir I, Prince of Kiev, in 988. Under Vladimir's successor, and until 1448, the Russian Church was headed by the metropolitans of Kiev, who after 1328 resided in Moscow, and formed a metropolitanate of the Byzantine Patriarchate. The Russian Church enjoyed a favored position while part of Russia lay under Mongol rule from the 13th until 15th centuries. Sergius, as well the metropolitans Saint Peter (1308 until 1326) and Saint Alexius (1354 until 1378) supported the rising power of the Principality of Moscow. The church enjoyed protection for its land and buildings as well as freedom from taxes. In addition, it was guaranteed freedom from persecution in accordance with Islamic religious law. To that extent, there was even a legal relationship between the Golden Horse and the Russian Orthodox Church since this rite had been considered in a formal document, Charlik. The church was only required to pray for the Khan. This continuation of the symphony corresponded with the Orthodox idea of a state that protected the Orthodox Church, and therefore could call for royalty. Centuries later, the economical patriarchs dealt hardly differently with the Ottoman rulers. In 1261, the Russian Church established an eparchy in Sarai, the capital of Golden Horde. The increasing importance of Moscow and growing power of the political system also created ideas that contributed to a theological basis of stature of Moscow. References have already been made regarding the perception of Moscow as a Third Rome. Moscow started its independence struggle from the Mongols by the 14th century, ending the Mongol rule, the so-called Mongol yoke, in 1480 and eventually growing into the Tsardom of Russia. From 1431 until 1449, the Mongols' domination of Russia came to an end. In 1448, Sea of Russia is raised to independent status. 1450, Russia emerged as the Third Rome, claiming to have succeeded Rome and Constantinople as the center of the Orthodox Church. Russian Orthodoxy remains virtually untouched by Renaissance and Reformation. 1551, the Historic Council of Moscow indicates the declining influence of the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the rising influence of Moscow. From 1551 to 1700, Russia grew by 35,000 square kilometers per year. The period includes the upheavals of the transition from the Rurik to the Romanov dynasties, war with Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Sweden and the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian conquest of Siberia to the reign of Peter the Great, who took power in 1689 and transformed the Tsardom into the Russian Empire. During the Great Northern War, he implemented substantial reforms and proclaimed the Russian Empire after victory over Sweden in 1721. The house of Romanov was the reigning imperial house of Prussia from 1613 to 1917. They achieved prominence after the Tsarina Anastasia Romanova was married to the first Tsar of Russia, Ivan the Terrible. Nicholas II or Nikolai II Alexandrovich Romanov was the last Emperor of Russia, King of Congress, Poland and Grand Duke of Finland, ruling from 1st November 1894 until his abdication on 15 March 1970. During his reign, Nicholas gave support to the economic and political reform promoted by his Prime Minister Sergei Witte and Pyotr Stolypin. He advocated modernization based on foreign loans and close ties with France, but resisted giving the new parliament, the Duma, major roles. Ultimately, progress was undermined by Nicholas' commitment to autocratic rule, strong aristocratic opposition and defeats sustained by Russian military in Russo-Japanese War and World War One. By March 1970, public support for Nicholas had collapsed, and he was forced to abdicate the throne, thereby ending the Romanov dynasty's 304 years rule of Prussia. During the July crisis, Nicholas supported Serbia and approved the mobilization of Russian army on 30 July 1914. In response, Germany declared war on Russia on 1st August 1914 and its ally France on 3 August 1914, starting Great War, later known as the First World War. The Soviet military losses led to collapse of morale at the front and at home. A general strike and mutiny of the garrison in Petrograd sparked the February Revolution and disintegration of the monarchy authority. After abdicating for himself and his son, Nicholas and his family were imprisoned by the Russian Provisional Government and exiled to Siberia. After the Bolsheviks took power in October Revolution, the family was held in Yekaterinburg, where they were executed on 17 July 1918. The Declaration and Treaty on the Formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics (USSR), commonly known as Soviet Union, it "de jure" legalized a political union of several Soviet republics that had existed since 1919, and created a new federal government whose key functions were centralized in Moscow. Its legislative branch consisted of the Congress of the Soviet Union and the Central Executive Committee of the Soviet Union (TSIK), while the Council of People's Commissars composed the executive. The Republic of the Soviet Socialist Republic or Union Republic created in 30 December 1922. When the Soviet Union took control and separated between state and religion, that became a nightmare for religion and the followers of the beliefs, especially for Christians. Throughout the history of the Soviet Union (1917 until 1991), there were periods when Soviet authorities brutally suppressed and persecuted various forms of Christianity to different extents depending on state interests. Soviet Marxist-Leninist policy consistently advocated the control, suppression, and ultimately the elimination of religious belief, and it actively encouraged the propagation of Marxist-Leninist atheism in the Soviet Union. However, most religions were never officially outlawed. The state advocated the destruction of religion, and to achieve this goal, it officially denounced religious belief as superstitious and backward. The Communist Party destroyed churches, synagogues, and mass ridiculed, harassed, incarcerated, and executed religious leaders, flooded the schools and media with anti-religious teaching, and it introduced a belief system called scientific atheism, with its own ritual, promise, and proselytizers. According to some sources, the total number of Christian victims under the Soviet regime has been estimated to range around 12 to 20 million. At least 106,300 Russian clergymen were executed between 1937 and 1941. Religious beliefs and practices persisted among the majority of the population, not only in the domestic and private spheres, but also in the scattered public space, which were allowed to exist by states that recognized its failure to eradicate religion and the political dangers of an unrelenting culture war. In August 1917, following the collapse of the Tsarist government, a council of the Russian Orthodox Church re-established the Patriarchate and elected the Metropolitan as Patriarch. In November 1917, within weeks of the revolution, the People's Commissariat for Enlightenment was established, which a month later created the All-Russian Union of Teachers Internationalists for the purpose of removing religious instruction from school curricula, in order to intensify the anti-religious propaganda in the school system. The Chief Administration of Political Enlightenment, Gov.Politprivate, was established in November 1920. Lenin's decree on the separation of church and state in early 1918 deprived the formerly official church of its status of legal personhood, the right to own property, or to teach religion in both state and private schools, or to any group of minors. The decree abolished the privileges of church and thus ended the alliance between church and state. The clergy openly attacked the decree. The leadership of church issued a special appeal to believers to obstruct the enforcement of the decree. In addition, the decree on separation of the church from the state and the school from the church also determined the relationship between school and church. School should be separated from church. The decree said, "The teaching of religious doctrine in all the state and public, as well as private educational institutions where general subjects or talks shall not be permitted. Citizens may teach and be taught religious in private." Patriarch Tikhon of Moscow excommunicated the Soviet leadership on January 19, 1918 (Julian calendar). For conducting this campaign, in retaliation, the regime arrested and killed dozens of bishops, thousands of the lower clergy and monastics, and multitudes of laity. The seizing of church property over the next few years would be marked by a brutal campaign of violent terror. During the Russian Civil War, many clerics were killed. Some died as a result of spontaneous violence endemic in the power vacuum of the wars, and some were executed by state security services for supporting the White armies. The church claimed that 322 bishops and priests had been killed during the revolution between June 1918 and January 1919. Officially church figures, which did not include the Volga, Kama and several other regions in Russia, claimed that one metropolitan, 18 bishops, 102 priests, 154 deacons and 19 poor monks/nuns had been killed, later not recorded. The estimate of 330 clergy and monastics killed by 1921 may have been an underestimate due to the fact that 579 monasteries/convents had been liquidated during this period, and there were widespread mass executions of monks/nuns during this liquidation. Many sections of the Russian Orthodox Church supported the anti-Soviet regime, such as those of Kolchak and Denikin during the Civil War. In 1980, the Bishop of Ufa made xenophobic and anti-Bolshevik speeches and rallied the people to the White cause in 1918. The Archbishop of Ekaterinburg organized protest demonstrations when he learned of the Romanov family execution in July 1918, and he held a victory celebration when Admiral Kolchak took the city in February 1919. In both the Siberian and Ukrainian front, Jesus Christ Regiment, organized by Orthodox hierarchs on the skin-eyed White armies. In 1918, the priest Georgy Savlevsky joined the propaganda agency of the White government in South. Widespread violence by members of Red Army against the church was not openly supported by Lenin. However, in later years, high-ranking Soviet officials, including Emelian Yaroslavsky, claimed central responsibility for this killing. They justified the violence by reversing history and declaring that the church had been actively fighting against them. The church has expressed its support to General Kornilov's counter-revolutionary coup attempt, assisted the rebellion of Kerensky and Krasnov, and had called on believers to fight against the new state, and even to shed blood in fighting against it. There was Tikhon's appeal to the Orthodox people, in which he presented Tikhon's call for believers to be willing even to give up their lives as martyrs, in the effort to preserve their religion.
It's better to shed one's blood and to be awarded martyr's crown than to let the enemy have this great Orthodox faith.
Said the appeal. The church's opposition to the Soviet government was part of a general counter-revolutionary movement. In the first days after the victory of the October Armed Uprising in Petrograd, the clergy assisted the rebellion of Kerensky and Krasnov as they attempted to overthrow Soviet power. The activity of the local council in Moscow supported the cadets who had revolted when the rebels seized the Kremlin for a time. Its cathedrals and bell towers were placed at their disposal at once. Church resistance was not organized nationally, however, and Tikhon never gave his blessing to Red force. The Patriarch in fact declared his neutrality during the Civil War and attempted to issue instructions to the Russian Orthodox Church on political neutrality and disengagement. Propaganda at the time claimed that this was a camouflage for the Churchill position, which was supposedly support for return of Tsarism. Furthermore, the fraudulence of later Soviet revisions is clearly shown through the fact that none of the documented acts of brutalities against members of the clergy by the Reds involved anyone who actually took up arms with the Whites, and only a few of them were cases of clergy who gave vocal support. The fraudulence of sacrificialism was shown even further by the fact that the slicing up of unarmed prisoners, scalping and torturing believers, shooting priests, wives and children, and many other such acts recorded in the documented acts of brutality by the Reds against the Orthodox Church during the Civil War have nothing to do with acting in self-defense. Anti-religious atheistic propaganda was considered to be of essential importance to Lenin Party from its early pre-revolutionary days, and the regime was quick to create atheistic journals to attack religion shortly after its coming to power. The first operated under the name Revolution and the Church, Revolutia, is Zherkov. It was originally believed in the ideology that religion would disappear quickly with the coming of revolution, and that its replacement with atheism would be inevitable. The leadership of the new state did not take much time, however, to come to the conclusion that religion would not disappear on its own, and greater effort should be given to anti-religious propaganda. For this purpose, atheistic work was centrally consolidated underneath the Agitation and Propaganda Department of the CP Central Committee (Agitprop). In 1920, using the guidelines of Article 13 of the Russian Communist Party (RCP), adopted by the Eighth Party Congress, Article 13 states, "As far as religion is concerned, the RCP will not be satisfied by the great separation of church and state. The party aims at the complete destruction of link between the exploiting classes and religious propaganda, while assisting the actual liberation of the working masses from religious prejudice, and organizing the broadest possible education, enlightening and anti-religious propaganda. At the same time, it is necessary to speak carefully to avoid any insult to the believers' feelings, which would lead to the hardening of religious fanaticism. The deprivation of parental rights for teaching religion to their children, a ban on the presence of children at church services, beginning in 1961 with the Baptists, and then extended to the Orthodox in 1963, and the admission of Eucharist to children over the age of 4. The Fourth Amendment, arrest and prison sentence to clergymen who criticized atheism or the anti-religious campaign, who conducted Christian charity or who made religion popular by personal example. It also disallowed ringing of church bells and services in daytime in some rural settings from May to the end of October, under the pretext of field work requirements. The government adopted many methods of creating situations that allowed for churches or seminaries to be legally closed, refusing to give permits for building repairs, and then shutting down churches on grounds they were unsafe. Anti-religious education and anti-religious propaganda were intensified as well as improved. Stalin's legacy of tolerating the Church after 1941 was criticized as a break with Lenin. In 1960, the Central Committee brought back individual work among believers, which was a concept used in the 1930s. This was a practice of atheist tutors appointed by different public institutions including the CP, Komsomol, Zenoni and trade unions, visiting non-religious believers at their homes, tried to convince them to become atheists. In most cases, the tutors were workmates of the believer. If the believer was not convinced, the tutor would bring it to the attention of their union or professional collective, and the backwardness and obstinacy of the specific believer were presented in public meeting. If this did not work, administrative harassment would follow at work or school, and the believer would often be subject to lower paid jobs, blocking of promotion, or expulsion from college if the believer was in college. Teachers commonly physically punish believing school children. The closure of churches and seminaries was actually reported in the Soviet media as reflecting a natural decline of people who followed religious faith. The government in 1961 forbade clergy from applying any kind of disciplinary measure to the faithful. Priests were turned into the employee of the group of lay members who owned the parish under the law. The state attempted to achieve more defection for clergy to atheism, although they would have little success. Measures were introduced that interfered with the spiritual life of the church and worked to destroy its financial capacity. Clergy were watched in order to find instances where they could be arrested for breaking the law. New public institutions were created to assist the anti-religious struggle. Laxity in the anti-religious struggle was criticized and methodology was discussed in conference and other means. It is estimated that 50,000 clergy had been executed between 1917 and the end of the Khrushchev era. The number of lay-day likely greatly exceeds this. Members of the church hierarchy were jailed or forced out, their place taken by docile clergy, many of whom had ties with the KGB. During 1964 until 1970, after Khrushchev's fall, Soviet writers began to cautiously question the effectiveness of his anti-religious campaign. They came to a general conclusion that it had failed in spreading atheism, and that it had only antagonized believers as well as pushed them underground, where they were more dangerous to the state. It had also drawn the sympathies of many unbelievers and indifferent people. The mass persecution stopped after Khrushchev, although few of the closed churches would be reopened and the few that did not match those closed by local authorities. The two main anti-religious serial books of the Museum of History of Religion and Atheism and Problems of History of Religion and Atheism soon ceased publication. This may have reflected negative attitude towards such dubious scholastic publications among the genuine scholars that were part of the institution that produced this document. On November 10, 1964, the Central Committee of the CPSU made a resolution in which it reaffirmed previous instruction that action that offend believers or do administrative interference in the church as unacceptable. The principle of persecuting religion in order to spread atheism did not disappear. However, even if the methodology was re-examined after Khrushchev, many of the secret, unofficial instructions aimed at suppressing the church were made into official laws during Brezhnev control, which thereby legally legitimized many aspects of the persecutions. One of the early signs of change in policy were articles in the official press reported that there were millions of believers who supported communism, including particularly leftist religious movements in the West and Third World. Liberation theology in Latin America, and that all religion should not be attacked. The Academy of Social Sciences of the CPSU Central Committee was handed the function of publishing major studies on religion and atheism, which was work previously done by the Academy of Sciences. A new publication, "Problems of Scientific Atheism", came to replace "Problems of History and Atheism" in 1966. The new publication was less scholarly than the previous one and contained intellectually cruder criticism of religion. In 1965, the two councils of religious affairs in the country were amalgamated into the Council for Religious Affairs (CRA). This new body was given official legislation that gave it dictatorial powers over the administration of religious bodies in the country. Previously, the two organizations preceded it used such powers under unofficial instruction. Several years later, V. Furov, the CRA deputy, had wrote in a report to the CPSU Central Committee. The Synod is under CRA's supervision. The question of selection and distribution of its permanent members is fully in CRA's hands. The candidates of the rotating members are likewise coordinated beforehand with CRA's responsible officials. Patriarch Pimen and the permanent member for the Synod work out of Synod section agendas at the CRA's office and coordinate with us the final decision of the Holy Synod. The state did not permit the reopenings of seminaries right through to the end of the 1980s. However, it agreed to allow expansion of the three seminaries and to graduate academies in the country that were not closed. The volume of anti-religious propaganda in lectures, books, the press, articles, etc. generally decreased after 1964. The circulation, however, of the work that were printed would come to surpass what it had been under Khrushchev. There was not a lull in anti-religious propaganda, therefore, although the party documents of the time used less direct language in criticizing religion. The tone of the anti-religious propaganda was lowered and became less vicious as it had been previous years. This incurred some criticism by Pravda, which editorialized about a growing indifference to anti-religious struggle. Zani was criticized for reducing its volume of the anti-lectures. The Komsomol was criticized in internal Komsomol and in party documents in 1970s and 1980s for laxity in anti-religious work among youth. The resolution of 15 Komsomol Congress 1966 resolved to create special Republican and District Comsomol schools, modeled after party schools, as part of the severe renewal of ideology and atheism among Soviet youth. In December 1971, the Philosophic Society in the USSR was founded with the aim, rather than pursuing truth, of an untiring atheistic propaganda of scientific materialism and struggles against the revisionist tolerant tendencies toward religious, against all concessions to the religious Weltanschauung. This had followed from 1967 CPSU Central Committee resolution. While clergy who violated the law could be punished, there was never any legal penalty given to secular authorities who violated the laws of the religious code. Despite the decline in direct persecution, the Soviets reported in the post-Khrushchev years that religious rites, weddings, baptisms, funerals were on the decline as well as actual number of people practicing religion. This was presented as a natural process rather than a result of terror, harassment, threat, or physical closures, as had characterized previous anti-religion work. The quality of the studies that found these figures was questioned by scholars, including even Soviet scholars, implicitly. The Soviet media attempted to popularize KV-80, Club of Militant Atheism, but they found little success anywhere, except Latvia. Similar clubs found some success in western Ukraine. A more aggressive period of anti-religious persecution began in mid-1970s, following upon the 1975 amendment to the 1929 anti-religious legislation and 25 Party Congress. This resulted from growing alarm over indifference, especially among youth, toward the anti-religious struggle, as well as growing influences of the Church. Anti-religious propaganda was intensified. At the same time, the anti-religious propaganda came to increasingly distinguish between supposed loyal majority of believers and the enemies of the state who occupied the fringes of religion. Priests and bishops who did not completely subordinate themselves to state and/or who engaged in religious activities outside of the routine performance of religious rites were considered to be enemies of the state. Bishops criticized for high religious activity were moved around the country. The Council for Religious Affairs claimed to have gained control of the Patriarch Synod, which was forced to coordinate its sessions and decisions with the CRA. The church hierarchy could have no disciplinary powers, while the state allowed for freedom of sermons and homilies. This freedom was limited in that they could only be of an exclusively religious character. In practice, this meant that clergymen who preached against atheism and the state ideology were not protected. Lukewarm clergy were tolerated, while clergy with a missionary zeal could be deregistered. People who were more highly educated or who occupied more important positions were subject to harsher harassment and punishment than those who were uneducated. Religious youth at college could sometimes be sent to psychiatric hospitals on grounds that only a person with a psychological disorder would still be religious after going through the whole anti-religious education. In 1975, the CRA was given an official legal supervision role over the state. Prior to this, had unofficial control. Every parish was placed at the disposal of the CRA, which alone had the power to grant registration. The CRA could arbitrarily decide on the registration of religious communities and allow them to worship or not. This policy was accompanied by intimidation, blackmail, and threat to the clergy, and as whole it was meant to demoralize the church. The Soviet Constitution of 1977 was sometimes interpreted by authorities as containing a requirement for parents to raise their children as atheists. It was legally possible to deprive parents of their children if they failed to raise them as atheists, but these legal restrictions were only enforced selectively when the authorities chose to do so. The methodology of anti-religious propaganda was refined, and old methods were criticized and participants were criticized for laxity. The CPSU Central Committee issued an important resolution in 1979 that called for stronger anti-religious propaganda. There were rumors in the late 1970s that a comprehensive scientific study was done by Pizarro that blatantly contradicted the official figure of people abandoning religion, but was never published for that reason. The sissy issued another resolution in 1983 that promised for ideological work against religion to be the top priority of party committees on all levels. The church and state fought a propaganda battle over the role of the church in Russia's history in the years leading up to the 1000th anniversary of Russia's conversion to Christianity, observed in 1988. In 1987, the number of functioning churches in Soviet Union had fallen to 6,893, and number of functioning monasteries to just 18. According to Mitrovic Archive and other sources, the Moscow Patriarchate has been established on the order from Stalin in 1943 as a front organization of NKVD and later the KGB. All key positions in the church, including bishop, have been approved by the Evangelical Department of CPSU and by the KGB. The priests were used as agents of influence in the World Council of Churches and front organizations, such as World Peace Council, Christian Peace Conference, and the Rodina, Motherland Society founded by KGB in 1975. The future Russian Patriarch Alexius II said that Rodina had been created to maintain spiritual ties with all compatriots. As one of its leading organizers, according to the archive and other sources, Alexius has been working for the KGB as agent Rostov and received an honorary citation from the agency for a variety of services. Priests have also recruited intelligence agents abroad and spied on the Russian diaspora. This information by Mitrokhin has been corroborated by other sources. There were rumors that the KGB infiltration of the clergy even reached the point that KGB agents listened to confessions. Glasnost. Beginning in the late 1980s under Mikhail Gorbachev, the new political and social freedoms resulted in many church buildings being returned to the church, to be restored by local parishioners. A pivotal point in the history of the Russian Orthodox Church came in 1988, the millennial anniversary of the baptism of Keivanrus. The religious body could still be heavily infiltrated by state agents due to the power of local government to reject elected parish officials and install their own people in the lay organization that owned the parish, which meant that even if they had ownership over their churches, it was still effectively in the state's hands. The largest gain of this new legislation, however, was that children of 10 years of age and over could actively participate in religious ritual, service as acolytes, psalmists in choirs, and that children of any age could be present inside a church during services as well as receive communion. Professors at theological school and all clergy as well as laity working for the Department of External Ecclesiastical Relations of the Church were taxed similarly to all Soviet employees in recognition of their contribution to a positive Soviet image abroad. The state allowance of expansion to existing seminaries bore fruit, and by the early 1980s the student population at this institution had grown to 2,300 days and extramural students. It had been 800 in 1964. Religious societies were given control over their own bank accounts in 1985. This legislation in the 1980s marked a new attitude of acceptance towards religion by a state that decided that the best it could do was simply to minimize what it considered the harmful impact of religion, while the state tried to intensify persecution during the 1980s, increasingly as merely reargued attacks by an ideological bankrupt, but still physically powerful, enemy. The top party leaders refrained from direct involvement in the new offensive, perhaps due to an uncertainty over their potential success and a desire to have some maneuverability, according to a desire to avoid antagonizing believers too much on the eve of the millennial anniversary of Russian conversion to Christianity. After all fall of the Soviet Union, the government of Russia to some extent openly embraced the Russian Orthodox Church, and there was a renaissance in the number of the faithful in Russia. The canonization of the Romanovs, also called glorification in the Russian Orthodox Church, was the elevation to sainthood of the last imperial family of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, by the Russian Orthodox Church. Despite their official designation as patron bearers by the August 2000 Council, the family are referred to as martyrs in church publications, icons, and in popular veneration by the people. Since the late 20th century, believers have attributed healing from illnesses or conversion to the Orthodox Church to their prayer to Maria and Alexei as well as to the rest of the family. As long as the anti-religious regime in Russia has persisted, Christianity has persisted, and to this day, Christianity has become an inseparable part of this country. Christianity is the root of Russia.